Hey, I want to say some more about open and relational theology because it is different. It's not new. Flavors of this and themes of open and relational theology show up in the Bible. So the themes of this are very, very old, but it's a newer thought and probably comes off differently because of how the church has been formed up until now. There are some very strong ways that most churches think about God and approaching God, which have developed over time. And just because they've developed over time doesn't mean that that's the only way to see it or even the correct way to see it. So, open and relational theology, what does it mean? And by the way, in the description here, I give you the website that you can go and read more about it. The Center for Open and Relational Theology, run by Tom Ord, who is the evangelist for open and relational theology. Check that out. Tom is amazing. His works are amazing. And there's so many smart people to glean from. So what does open and relational theology mean? First is that God is, history is open. Our lives are open. We really do have free will. I know that a lot plays into the decisions that we make. And some people go so far as to say that take God out of the equation, our genetics, our upbringing, our culture, all those influences pretty much predispose us to what decisions we make. I appreciate that. I know that, for the first part of my adult life, I ate the same cereal. I used the same laundry detergent. I bought the same bar soap that my family used because that's how I knew to do it. But then over time, I found my own way and changed my breakfast patterns, changed my bar soap, and even changed the laundry detergent, right? So we have the capacity to change, and we have the capacity to really make decisions on our own. Maybe a lot of our decisions are kind of automatic, and that's stuff that we've learned. But I know from my own life, and I bet you do too, that there are times in your life when you come to a fork in the road and you make a decision not to do what everything in your head is telling you to do. Well, that's a heavily theological position. God does not control the outcome. Our lives are not predetermined. Everything that happens is not according to God's will because that's not how God works. Our future is open and God is with us in the unfolding of that future. Also, come back to a little interesting caveat on that in just a second. But through it all, open and relational theology maintains that God is highly relational. In fact, the primary characteristic that ORT, that's open and relational theology, upholds is that God's primary characteristic is love. Not power, but love. That God is always loving. There's a Hebrew word called hesed that shows up pervasively. It's all over the place. It talks about loving kindness. This Hebrew word you hear me talk about, shalom, is related to that. That this is the core nature of God, as being loving and kind and wants well-being for everybody and wants relationship with everybody. So we believe that God is relational, that God is with us all the time, wanting this well-being in our life, wanting all these good things based on God's character and nature of love. That's just who God is. And we see this reflected all over the place. We sometimes sense a nudge of God, a closeness from God. We might not even call it God. That's okay. But I bet you believe in love. Do you believe in love? I bet you do. Well, we're just simply saying that love comes from somewhere. And maybe love is God, God is love. Maybe it's one of the same thing. Who knows? All right. But we know there's this thing called love that we can't quite define or put our fingers on, but it's there and it's real and it motivates us at times to do things that we might not otherwise do. Love is with us. Love is with us in great depths. This is kind of a panentheistic way of thinking. Panentheistic ways means that all is in God. And sort of the idea that we're talking about here is that all of life is wrapped in this thing, this presence, this thing that we're calling God, which sustains life, which sustains creation and ongoing creation. And that to me is very compelling and beautiful and wonderful. I don't need to have clear definitions on who God is necessarily. I mean, we do the best we can to understand things, but at the same time, I recognize that as soon as we say with too much of a degree of certainty that we understand God, we've already screwed it up. because this thing is too big. And yet we understand through experience and history in our own lives that there is something very good in the air. And when we lean into that, when we listen to that voice, when we go deep on love, it leads to very good places of healing, relational restoration, treating other people well, treating the planet well. It's all good. Now, back on this open theism thing, this is one of the little shockers that sometimes sits a little funny, and maybe we're going to have a cup of coffee on this one. But part of the openness of God, if we really do have free will, that means that God doesn't know the future with absolute specificity. Now, I know there are verses that talk about all the days of our life being numbered, and God's going to call us home at a predetermined time, but I'm just saying that's poetic. That's just hyperbole. Because in truth, God cannot know the future with great specificity, because we all have choice. And it could be that somewhere along the way I make a decision that's a little bit rogue, that I have the freedom to do, and somebody else does the same thing, and somebody else does the same thing, and that changes the makeup. And God is at work through the whole thing. Love is trying to work us all towards a more loving existence and creation and community, all of that stuff. And this might come as a surprise to some of you. If you're going to place a bet for where history is going, place that bet with God, because I believe that God, being all pervasive, knows absolutely every card in everybody's hands and knows the probability of things going in a particular way. So God's got a pretty good hunch on the way things are going, and yet you just never know. You just never know what will happen, and God doesn't even know what tomorrow brings. I do believe, however, that this whole thing's going somewhere, and I think that creation itself is fostered by whatever this thing is we're calling God, and if that's love, if it's shalom, if it's hesed, whatever that thing might be, I think it's very good and loving and sustains life, and I think that is the beginning of everything. If that's Big Bang, I'm cool with that. If it's evolution, if that helped evolution along, I'm cool with that. But I think that's also where we're headed. And I think that's the hope that Jesus talked about, is that there's something more that we can look forward to. And I think that is going to be wrapped in love. I could go on and on and on about this and would love to talk more about it. So if you'd like to talk more about it, reach out to me. Let's grab a cup of coffee and let's get nerdy. All right. Thanks for checking it out. Check out more of them. I hope they're helpful.